Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines, shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's August 10th, 2025. Let's get to it.
Morning, Eric. How you doing?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
Good. Sue and Eric in hats.
That's right.
I like it.
Yeah.
Repping my Devils.
That's nice. Go Duke. So this is our 5th episode, Sue. We've been doing this for about 1 month, and I just wanted to check in. You still having fun?
Oh, so much fun. So much fun reading comments. Love doing it each week with you. Love thinking about what we're going to do next. So just, it's the best.
Yeah, I think on episode 2, we talked about the outpouring of support and how awesome it's been from the UI community. But up to this point, we've had over 1,300 downloads. Over 400 people have listened to the first episode. So really excited about that traction. And it seems like it's kind of resonating with a few folks. And what we set out to do is just talk about some of these topics and maybe a different angle, a different lens, kind of give our opinions and also perspectives, not particularly choosing one side or the other, but just kind of how we were thinking about things to maybe add a different perspective. And it seems like that some people kind of like that.
Yeah, and I think, I've just recently joined the Substack community. That's a really vibrant community. I get a lot of comments there, lots of comments about making ourselves more accessible on other platforms. So I think it was really, really brave of us to post a video version on YouTube. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah, we'll see. We've got our YouTube channel, and we'll expect this week again an extended version. We'll try to condense it down a little bit more for the audio only on Apple, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. But the full, close to as we can get the full episode on YouTube each week, which video editing a little trickier.
Yeah, so I hope people keep giving us comments, what you want to hear. We love kudos, but quite frankly, just as much, we have really benefited from people who gently suggest that we can do things like leave a little bit more air so that people could breathe. So keep the cards and letters coming.
Yeah, appreciate all the support. How have you been?
I'm angry, but you know what I do with anger, then I decide what I'm going to do with that. And I'm angry and exhausted with what's coming out of the White House right now. The one that sent me over the edge just last week was the executive order on changing the census, which, y'all, it's unconstitutional, right? To put out an executive order saying that you are doing something that cannot be done without an amendment to the Constitution, I think is irresponsible, dare I say, un-American. And especially from the president, supposed to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. You've now just put it out there. So that perturbs me. Pete Hegseth.
Yeah, what is that?
Reposting of the Christian nationalists. Listen, have the belief you want to believe as an individual. I was always, as a public servant, I tried to be really careful to not express my views publicly, lest somebody who worked for me thought that they were supposed to have my views in order to work for me. That didn't mean I didn't have them. It just meant that I expressed them in the voting booth. So the idea that our Secretary of Defense, again, like the president, who is no longer just an individual, he carries that weight of responsibility when he took the oath, to post a video that is choosing a religion, particularly with some particularly awful views about women, I don't even know what to do with it. So I've decided what I want us to do with it. Number one is 2 things for you all, and I encourage people, in the words of Walt Whitman or Ted Lasso, and it's really why we have this pod. I want people to be curious, not judgmental. Seek to understand, not to choose. So when you see these things, I don't care what part of the spectrum you are politically, take them in and then do your own work to say, does this make any sense? We're trying to help by putting it in context, whether locally or personally or nationally or internationally. But really, when you hear these things, don't choose a side. Seek to understand. And then the second piece is, I think the overwhelming cruelty and meanness that has become expected and allowed. It is not my experience that half of the people I run into are mean or evil or awful or anything. I remember when George Floyd was killed. I didn't know what to do, so I decided what I was going to do was a personal crusade to make sure that every person I ran across would know that I saw them. And so instead of just ignoring it or being too busy or a throwaway line, I decided I would engage. And I don't know if it made a difference to them. It made a difference to me. So in the face of what we're being bombarded with, that is seeming normal and I worry is becoming the norm. For everyone who's listening to this, I'm going to challenge you to be curious, not judgmental. And as I do every week, just let's be kind to one another, see each other, and I guarantee you're going to find that we are all so much more similar than we are different.
Yeah, that's a great scene from Ted Lasso. I think
It
it's
is.
season 1, episode 8. I just pulled up where he's throwing the darts.
Yeah, it's the best.
Folks should go back and watch that. That's really good.
Season 4 coming up. Should we do some work?
Yeah, let's get some headlines. This week in the threat picture, the GENUIS Act, the first of its kind crypto legislation, is imposing strict federal oversight, reserve requirements, and a ban on algorithmic stablecoins. Also, the Department of Health and Human Services begins winding down federal mRNA vaccine research and development, canceling $500 million in projects despite expert pushback on biodefense risks. So, Sue, we'll start today with the stablecoins. A few weeks ago, the GENUIS Act was signed into law. The GENUIS Act is the Guaranteeing Enhanced Transparency in the United States Stablecoin, GENUIS. Mandates a full one-to-one reserve backing, routine third-party audits, and licensing for issuers while banning risky algorithmic models. So, taking a step back, stablecoins are cryptocurrencies, and they maintain more consistent value and price. We can contrast that with other cryptos like Bitcoin and Ether that fluctuate a little bit more, and then we may talk a bit about meme coins here towards the end. But there are 3 types of stablecoins that can be introduced. There's fiat collateralized, which is what this act institutionalizes, things like USDC, USDT, and that's where each token is backed by a real-world asset, typically $1 held in the bank or similar type securities. There's also crypto collateralized, so it could be backed by crypto, again, Bitcoin or Ether, and then algorithmic stablecoins where it's not backed by collateral, but it's code-based or supply and demand mechanisms. Well, what this act does is it regulates, it adds federal oversight to stablecoins, requires financial reporting and transparency and licensing. It also adds the reserve backing, so stablecoin must be held one-to-one with dollar reserves or cash equivalents like the T-bills, and no algorithmic stablecoins are allowed because think about that's the most volatile type. All right, how's this going to help us? It's instant transactions, especially compared to some of the more legacy TradFi systems. Traditional finance is one of the industry buzzwords, and it's programmable. So we're going to contrast this with credit cards. When you make a credit card transaction, it usually takes a couple days to process. Compare that to stablecoins would be instant. There's usually a 2 to 3.5% service fee, depending on which card you're using, compared to pennies on the transaction for stablecoins. Compare this to an ACH or wire, significantly slower, especially when you're doing cross-border or international, compared to instant and borderless with stablecoin, as well as the lower transaction fees. And then finally, this sounds more like Venmo, PayPal, right? Something we've become more accustomed to in recent years. That's instant-ish, and there's typically between 1.75% to 3% fee on top of those transactions as well, unless you're loading your account with American Express and some other deals that they have out there. But again, compared to the pennies. One of the biggest jumps, though, is that these are programmable. So it kind of creates custom rules for money. You currently have time-based rules that you can make. So for example, I set up in my bank account to send X amount of dollars every week to someone or at the beginning of the month. But this changes it to if X happens, then send Y dollars to Z location. So for example, you'd want to release $10,000 to a contractor doing some work on your home once the code passes quality assurance and submitted by August 1st. You set a deadline. Another one example we have is if a GPA is above 3.5 for a student, you're enrolled full time, then release the scholarship fund. So this eliminates or reduces the requirement for humans. You already have the basic time rules, but this expands it and adds if then triggers. So I wanted to ask you, Sue, why are we talking about this on our national security podcast? And I will say it's not because we're planning to launch our own UI coin, although that could be of interest.
Nah, let's wait till we.
Let me discuss meme coins first before we launch UI.
Exactly, and let's get to 10 users. 10 episodes before we go down that path. So just one great discussion. I love that way to describe it simply and usefully. I like it. It felt to me that in the previous administration or for the previous years, not penning it to an administration, it's like we were covering our ears going la, 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 la over digital currency. And I just think, one, that was myopic, but even more importantly for the United States and our centrality to global monetary policy, I think we have to step into it. I think, you and I talk across many of these topics about the importance of U.S./Western leadership, and I think this is one of them. So I like that we're stepping into digital currency. I think you made a great point about the approach is very consistent with President Trump's approach, which is regulation light and action forward. I think that's true, but I think in this case we needed to move out. So I like that we're stepping into digital currency because I think global leadership is really important for us to be able to maintain. I like that it's fiat centralized. It feels to me as a first step in to have it backed by something real. There are regulations put into it in terms of audit and transparency, and I think that makes it, for a national approach, to be the kind of thing that makes sense. We're comfortable with it. We can grow into it. So I like that about it. Anyone who knows me knows that I like that it's modern. And what I mean by modern is we are still in the process of moving from rules that are based on a disproportionately physical world where things had to move actual distance and long times based on that distance. This is a world of speed and global access. And this is really important, self-custody, right? We're not going back to a simpler time where everyone's just going to trust the government to take care of their interests. I want to be able to have some control over the things that I do. And so I think this is an approach that is very consistent with moving in those modern digital individual direction while still providing the benefits of governmental assurance and opportunity. So I like it. I think it's a good way for us to go. I will say that people should be really thoughtful about, I'm not sure that this either increases or eliminates risks of the current systems that we have. In a way, it's a bit risk neutral in the sense that because it's new, there are probably risks that the ways we view us being able to work it will either be not sufficient or exploitable. And so we'll have some risks that come from newness. And without the base of experience about what do you do when you have a global digital crisis, what does that look like? But I think we'll learn that. But I don't think other than that, there are risks of any, and we see them already, types of currency. So I think there are always risks and risk management that will have to be developed, but I'm not sure that this either increases or reduces risks. I think you said, or in earlier when we talked about it, that there are some good experiences that from a fraud perspective, that this is traceable. I mean, there are good traceability features. So again, I think there will be new manifestations of risk, but I'm not sure that people should be worried that it's like the sky is falling because it's new.
And I think there's a big advantage to us showing this leadership in it and advancing it, and part of our global projection of the dollar being an international currency. So
Right.
contrasting this with China is cautiously moving forward on launching their first stable coins. They're going to kind of put it in a Hong Kong sandbox where they do a lot of their, new tech and financial stuff to boost international use of the renminbi and challenge US dollar dominance. But fear of their capital outflows is slowing progress. There's a Hong Kong licensing regime that'll initially put out a few licenses for stablecoin, possibly as low as one, but they're focusing on tightly controlled B2B, which is business to business applications with very strict requirements on reserves and disputes handling. So I kind of wanted to contrast this with our previous discussion last week in terms of the space segment, where you said China's aim is to win the global competition, so their system is the one that dominates. So this seems like it'd be a good opportunity to internationalize their currency, compete with the dollar, and insulate them in future conflicts with projecting their form of currency in their government. But how does this highlight kind of the limitations of an authoritarian regime or communist regime compared to our capitalist structure?
Yeah, and I think this poses a different kind of problem for China than even just their Silk Road or Belt and Road initiatives, which is their effort to compete within the context of the system they already have. Boy, there are things about digital currency that and stablecoin, that I think you're seeing their struggle with. They like the idea for all the reasons that we like it, and because it allows them global market access. But I just read an article Friday that says they've instructed all traders to halt doing any research, any marketing of stablecoin, because it just flies in the face of how tightly they control individual activities. And so, you know what I said about, I like this because it's modern. It's good to remember that Americans, we're a revolutionary people. Like at our best, we remember that it's government of the people, for the people, and by the people. That's when we're at our best. That is not the Chinese philosophy. I mean, one of the reasons that we talk about how I think scary they are in terms of the use of data is because they collect data on their population that they do experiments on. So I think this really does put them to a test differently than it does almost anyone else, because in order to reap the benefits, you have to relinquish some control. And I think that's going to be just hard intellectually, hard societally, hard governmentally. And interestingly enough, a lot of their success in making progress globally has been because they can do this whole of nation to include getting the focus of all the individuals, all the companies, and all the government on some future plan. So I think this is, and you saw it with this ban. Yeah. It's important, but boy, it challenges so many things about who they are, different from in our case, which in a weird sort of way enables who we are in that balance between government serving us and individuals having control. So I think this puts them to a real test, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they resolve that.
Sure. Well, there are the other cryptos as well, right? So you've got Bitcoin and Ether. Those are a little more mainstream. There's some others, but they can be volatile. Bitcoin has somewhat led the market by about a month and stayed relatively tied to the major indices. But then you've also got the meme coins, which are purely speculative, right? Doge, Shiba Inu, Trump, and then some other less appropriate names. What I wanted to talk about with you was no burying our heads in the sand. Coinbase joined the S&P 500 in May. They're a transaction site for trading digital currencies, and they make their money primarily on trading fees, but through digital currency transactions. While TradFi banks and institutions have been on the S&P before, you can even think alternative asset class managers like Blackstone, Apollo Global, and then you've still got traditional banks, Bank of America, Charles Schwab. But now some of your mutual funds and ETFs that track the broader markets have exposure to the crypto industry. Are we having the right conversations about crypto in terms of our financial system and the impacts that some of these risks might have on our national security?
Well, I think we're going to try and help that with the future episode focused on the whole picture of crypto. I think beginning to, but I don't think it's mainstream. I don't think it hits the average bear Americans yet in terms of really understanding the trades you're making, whether personally, lots of data on people who have mistakenly invested in, say, meme coins and then lost their money. I think so. And more than that, how is it a source of investment and how does that work? So I think we're beginning to, but I think the conversations are more focused from a market perspective, from an investor perspective, than from a what does this do into the overall stability of everything from personal economy to national economy to global economy. So let's see if we can't help that in future episodes.
Moving on to the next topic. Our Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, led by Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is winding down federally backed mRNA vaccine development through BARDA, canceling or descoping about 22 projects totaling $500 million, while letting a few late-stage contracts finish. Kennedy argues mRNA hasn't performed well for upper respiratory infections and states, quote, "We're shifting that funding towards safer, broader vaccine platforms that remain effective even as viruses mutate." Public health experts counter that mRNA saved millions of lives, remains safe and effective as an advantage we shouldn't squander. Sue, what are your thoughts on this recent shift in prioritization at HHS?
I'm stunned silence. I have so many thoughts, but let's see if I can't model myself after you a little bit and bounce up for a minute and talk about how mRNA vaccines work. Because I think, even though this is my happy place, I think if it's just buzzwords, then you're having to, as I said in my first segment, choose rather than understand. So let's see if we can help understanding. The way an mRNA starts for messenger RNA, it's a building block of life. It's how we communicate at the cellular level. The way mRNA vaccines work is they deliver synthetic, not live, synthetic mRNA to tell cells to make a protein. And those proteins then trigger an immune response, antibodies and T cells, just the way it works, right? So the way vaccines work is you stimulate cells to produce an immune response. It learns that immune response so that at some point in the future, when it faces a live actor, it knows how to respond and can fight that off. So this is just a synthetic molecule that triggers a protein to build an immune response so that in the future, when you're faced with a real virus, you can fight it off. This is really important. It cannot alter your DNA. So people who suggest that you're doing something horrifying, just not so. The advantages of mRNA vaccines are rapid design and production. We all saw that in action during COVID. It wasn't that there weren't tens of years of research on mRNA beforehand, but when faced with the crisis of COVID and Operation Warp Speed, look how quickly we developed the design and protein of a vaccine. There isn't any live virus involved, so it's a strong safety profile. It is easily adapted to new variants. And if you think about how many variants that we've had of COVID since its inception, with different types of vaccines, you have to develop a vaccine for each new variant. mRNA is very adaptive, and it produces a strong immune response right off. So lots of good things just in terms of fighting off viruses. There are risks. There are risks of everything. The most common is what we most often felt was fatigue and fever and soreness. There are some rare side effects, myocarditis, affecting the lining of the heart, especially in the young males, and some strong allergic responses. The other thing that's a risk of mRNA is you have to have cold storage requirements, which really has limited some of its transportability to less supported environments. Was COVID-19 our first experience with mRNA vaccines? It was not. there was a lot of mRNA platform study for the Zika virus and for flu. It was the first that were put to use globally. And so now it's considered a proven platform. So just to talk about some of the Secretary's claims about the risk, I thought I'd give you some number. Over 5.5 billion doses of the COVID vaccine based on mRNA were administered globally with 95% efficacy initially and 80-90% against severe illness. There were rare serious side effects, and you're saying, Sue, rare? That's not what the Secretary said. Anaphylaxis, the allergic response, on average 4.8 instances of allergic reaction per million doses. Myocarditis in young men, that is more serious and can be affected with decisions between a doctor and a patient, 63 per million. And so these numbers are small. So just back to our thinking person's view of the claims that are made, do you think if millions and millions and millions of people were dying because of the vaccine itself, we wouldn't have heard about these numbers? Are vanishingly small, and actually one of the reasons why you continue to do risk. There are other vaccines that can be developed for this. Some live virus is a great example, is our MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella, is a live virus vaccine, and it is, and they are awfully good at some things, but they are not as flexible and not as good for some others. And so I guess bottom line I would say is do some research yourself, but in general, the claims about the risks versus effectiveness of mRNA are really, really difficult. I think what bothers me the most, and then I'll turn it over to you for some more questions, is as with the president, he seems to have little understanding of second and third order effects of statements like this. The biggest one is canceling research. Well, I would say the first one is just sending out a message to people to not trust what their doctor says, not trust science is just devastatingly bad. And we see it, you and I live in Texas. Eric, how do you feel about the measles outbreak 50 miles away from your newborn son? Right? And that's all based on people who believed that these things were dangerous in a way that was not supported by science. So number one is just continuing eroding of trust. Two, you all hear me talk about this all the time. The reason there are things that the government is good at, and that is big problems, long time horizons, and deep pockets. When you cut research, governmental research, you are eroding our ability to produce quality things at scale. President Trump could not have done what he did with Operation Warp Speed if there hadn't been decades of research on mRNA beforehand. So when you cut the research, what are you going to do the next time? I also think you erode our first mover advantage. The world depends so much on U.S. leadership in this field. We have a huge installed base of not only research, science, we attract scientists to our universities. We have a regulatory environment that ensures safety, and we just move on. And the global consequence of lack of U.S. leadership, someone will step into it. And do we really want to depend on that? We talk about supply chain challenges. Do we really want to be dependent on somebody else's solution to the next global pandemic? And I think the last is, and I think this is almost too early for me to say, but I just read an article this morning that they have found that the attacker at the CDC in Atlanta was an anti-vaxxer. So leaders who don't understand that there are people sitting in basements who are disenfranchised, who are looking to find someone responsible for whatever peril is in their life, take these statements and they decide that they're going to act on them. So the range of consequence of this goes from you're taking away a really great tool, you're eroding trust, you're undermining the ability for us to be ready for the future, and you're producing a global environment that's less safe. But other than that, probably fine.
Yeah,
No,
the
this is
measles
bad.
outbreak in Texas was bullshit. It's selfish, right? Like my 9-month-old cannot get his MMR vaccine because that comes at a year because it's a live virus, right? And the additional risks incurred of him getting it at an earlier age. And so by folks not vaccinating their children, right, reduces our overall herd immunity. That virus is now being spread or has a greater opportunity to be spread. And then he has a increased likelihood to get it, where at an age when his body's not able to fight it off as well.
Plus, the intellectual dishonesty between a minute ago saying that the MMR vaccine, a live virus, was not safe, getting people to run away from that, and then today saying, the in some way safer and more flexible and more useful mRNA vaccines, those are bad too. Let's go to live virus. That is intellectually dishonest. And again, maybe this is because I served in the government for my whole career. I do not understand these people not understanding the responsibility they care. I could care less what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. thinks personally. What I want him to do as Secretary of Health and Human Services is feel the weight of responsibility for the safety of the American people. And I don't feel that. And this just sends me over the edge.
Yeah, I think you did a great job of summarizing why there is still value in wholesale vaccines. And it's
You
not
bet.
a mutually exclusive thing. We need both, but this was our first mover advantage in mRNA research to be able to pivot, to adapt to future potential pandemics, whether it's created in a lab or whether it's a naturally evolving flu variation. The point I want to ask you about too is where's the money going to come from? Because market forces are not enough here. Federal dollars de-risk early stage research. The counter argument might be that, the pharmaceutical industry will research this. If there's a need for these vaccines or need for these drugs, then they'll continue it on their own. But they're kind of backed into a corner. As bad as the pharmaceutical industry and our healthcare industry is in this country, and that future discussions hopefully on our resilience there in the national security, but the average cost to create a new drug, to create an approved drug, is about $2.3 billion. That's according to a Tufts University study that they did a few years ago. It takes 10 to 15 years, and I feel like that's on the low side, or the short time horizon, from discovery to approval of the drug. And the failure rate is about 90% from drugs that enter clinical trials that never even reach the market. So there's so many variations of so many drugs that don't even make it to clinical trials because the company realized, that's not going to work. So pharma will not self-fund these pandemic preparedness, right? And without government investment, we lose the speed, the capability, and to be able to control and adjust, right, with those spike proteins tracking on the mRNA like you talked about. Because otherwise, they make money by making more GLP-1 or other statins or other drugs that we need, but they're more lucrative because this is just a reaction, not a prevention. What are your thoughts?
Well, remember, businesses are responsible to their shareholders, right? Their shareholders are holding them responsible for basically return to them, which is in money, right? They have to do that. You read about what Tesla board of directors was saying to Elon Musk when he was spending his time doing Doge, and their stock was falling because of global national reaction to the things being there. And they were saying, whoa, what's your responsibility here? So businesses are responsible to their shareholders. Their shareholders want to make money. And the U.S. government is responsible to its shareholders, which are the American people. And that's been, I talk about this too, which is that wonderful combination and tension between capitalism and democracy has led to a whole bunch of successes when we do it right together. But I'm distracted because I was thinking about how much trouble Jamie Dimon, head of the Business Roundtable, was in when, I'm going to say 5 to 7 years ago, he decided that companies should also have some social responsibility. And there was this great uproar.
Yeah.
But you see, as a result of that, people started caring about climate and had to be responsible reporting on what they were doing and what they were doing in terms of their governance and what they were doing with their humans. And you started seeing companies respond to that. And then with the introduction of the new president, when he got rid of those imperatives, climate, DEI, now you see companies walking back from their responsibility. And the idea is companies, you be responsible for money, right? So market forces aren't going to be enough. Interestingly, maybe we ought to do a whole show on In-Q-Tel just because it's a really interesting model. In-Q-Tel was a venture firm formed by a group of citizens in response to the national securities community need to get access to what was going on in Silicon Valley and wanting to have inspired the production of commercially available things. One of my favorite early In-Q-Tel successes is the company Palantir that is every other word on the business technology page these days. An amazing company that does really interesting things with data over the years. In 2003, one of its first investments was from the U.S. government because we recognized more than the private investment community what the potential for national security of their technology was. And so that was a great example of the government recognizing that it needed to step in to provide resources to make something good happen. The other end of that spectrum, and I think this is something that people don't recognize, is when the government invests in things for national security, when it does it right, you have societal benefit. So one of the things that most people know as just part of their history is back in the Cold War, when we couldn't see what was going on in the Soviet Union, the national security community developed satellites, imaging satellites that could see beyond the horizon. And those images and the development of that imaging capability and image processing gave us incredible insights from a national security perspective. The other thing that happened while the national security community was developing images and image processing to be able to identify military threats is we got really good at image processing. And today, almost every woman benefits from a mammogram whose history is dependent on those early days of the lessons in national security and image processing. So this balance between commercial pull and governmental foundation has benefited us in so many different ways. If you pull the legs out of the governmental investment in long-term things, you may not feel the impact today, but we will feel it tomorrow and the next day and the next day when we need to rapidly respond to something new and there's no foundation to do so.
Yeah, the amount of time that it takes place to spin this back up and being on our heels to invest research in when there is another pandemic. And I don't have my tinfoil hat with me here. I need to put that together. Whether it's made in a lab in Wuhan or whether it's naturally occurring, like it's inevitable that we're going to have another large scale pandemic or localized thing that we need to respond to. And we're just reducing our overall capability and reducing our supply chain by not continuing to have this research domestically because it's going to be offshored, and countries like China are continuing to research. Europe is going to continue to research. And then say it is another global pandemic. I guess that's redundant, right? A pandemic. Then good job. Pangea. Then you're going to be reliant on those external forces for those resources and pay yourself first. They're going to want to make sure that their population is taken care of.
Yeah, you've kind of made it worse all around. You made it, I don't hear any discussion about what we learned during COVID about, wow, we really need to look at our global supply chain for precursors because it still hasn't been addressed. And this isn't talking about that. And the other side is, if the only vaccine that had been available in 2020 had been one produced in China, how would we have felt about that? So I just don't see how this is helping us on any front, whether from commercial scientific leadership or from national resiliency and preparedness and deterrence. I just don't see how I don't see how this benefits us on any front, nor is it founded in science. So it's kind of an over.
Yeah, kind of a parallel between these two topics too, in terms of we have leadership, or we are leading, or we had leadership. Now we're continuing to push on the stable coins, but we're kind of ceding our advantage potentially on the mRNA.
Yeah, I think you've recognized that we'd probably get chatty about these when at the beginning of the episodes I said, "Oh, these will go quick."
Yeah. Yep. And kind of why we started this podcast in the first place, right?
Exactly. Hope so.
All right. Well, we'll talk about our predictions from last week and kind of more what we're thinking moving forward. So last week I called that there would be action in Russia, Ukraine before Gaza. Well, Bibi proposed occupying, and there is now a meeting in Alaska next week between President Trump and President Putin. Man, I just think about all the guys who run the logistics for presidential movements and how in the matter of a week they're getting everything set up that they need to in Alaska. Good luck, fellas and gals. Sue, last week you said that August 8th was a day worth watching in terms of the Ukraine deadline from President Trump. What do you think?
I think it dovetails with what you said. I'm a little disappointed in myself for my Romp Around the World episode where in Russia, Ukraine, I squinted and I said it was maybe moving in the direction of goodness. I did say that Putin hadn't weighed in yet. And so that's what you're seeing now. I think your comment on you're thinking about the logistics of presidential movements, and that's your reaction to this. I think it shows the difference between our foundations. Again, I don't know how to say it. President Putin has his own aims. They are not ours. They are not going away. It is to undermine democracy, particularly that which is practiced by the West. He is not our friend, and he is not afraid of President Trump. And the idea that we started this with I'm very disappointed in Putin. I'm going to set a deadline. And now we've invited an international pariah onto our territory for a talk that at least today not only doesn't include Zelensky or Europe, no, and is saying, well, Ukraine's going to have to give up some territory.
The whole East, right? Don't we have an obligation to arrest him if he lands in Alaska?
Just so many things are wrong
as
with
an
this.
international criminal court?
Yes,
I just thought about that.
Well, we probably don't believe that. Anyway, so it's just a hot mess. I think there are so many themes that we've talked about as we watch this unfold is what's the foundation for whatever is being talked about? And no matter what words are spoken at that, for anything lasting to happen, there has to be a foundation that is more than just somebody's handshake or a word. And if you go back to the Zelensky meeting in the White House, when President Trump said, Putin says he'll do it. And Zelensky, and this is where Zelensky got in trouble, and said, why in the world would you believe that? Well, I just think it's true. So, and then the Gaza occupation, I think these are two things that will test President Trump's ability to do something real. And in the absence, you have real potential for creating additional conflict and global protests and continued lack of effectiveness on behalf of the United States as a world leader in this security environment. So just watch these as they go. I'm sorry that we were kind of right about it. This isn't going away, and this is not. We're playing with something that is far more than chaff being thrown out to distract from Epstein. These are real world events. There are real consequence, real human consequence, real security consequence, well beyond whatever the day of the week it is now. I was thinking about the Azerbaijan-Armenia discussions. And there's some real hopefulness there, but a lot of it depends on where the power center is, as countries trying to decide with whom they're going to align depending upon whom they can trust. It's not a pretty day.
Yeah, a lot of the questions in that press conference of signing that agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia was, how do you ensure that this stays and that they aren't just words and a country doesn't go back? And it was basically resting on the president. He was like, I negotiated this. It's because, like, I believe me that they will not go back because they gave me their word and we trust each other. And will that last through the next administration or the next couple of years? And I think, to your point, these are generational impacts, a lot of these decisions that are being made between Israel, Palestine, Gaza, and this potential negotiation in Alaska next week.
And again, the strength of, I mean, I feel like a broken record on this. The strength of America has always been that it's the president, not the person. That it is the position they hold, and it is America in all its wonder and in all its strength that is the foundation for any of the agreements we made. And so this insertion of a person's name as though that is more than the weight of who we are as a nation, and then now what seems to be that name eroding the global understanding and belief in who we are as a nation, is a really very difficult turn of events and worth watching. And for all the people listening to this, again, this isn't about politics. This is about who we are.
You're watching for next week?
Well, I'm so nerdy and I'm such a child of the space race that the one that struck my interest was a random news article that said that the Trump administration has decided to destroy 2 functioning satellites that give data to all sorts of consumers on CO2 emission for the purpose of crop planting and production and stuff, and that we are no further information deciding that we're not going to destroy those satellites, not privatize them, not anything else. We're going to take perfectly good satellites that are providing data that people use, and we're going to destroy those. Given that there was no reason given, I don't really know, but given that they're healthy and they're measuring CO2, I just have to wonder that it is another kind of ham-handed broad brush. Oh, climate, we don't believe in that anymore. Let's get rid of those satellites so that nobody knows. So I guess what I'm watching is the issue of the further diminution or elimination of data as an element of strength and transparency for the government in service of the American people. So I think I'm watching that.
Does the Space Force at least get to test one of their anti-satellite missiles? And will this become a artificial reef in the ocean, like when we sink antiquated or expired ships?
We'll probably burn up on reentry so we don't get the coral reef benefit. I know. Good idea, though. Good thesis. Orbiting the Earth just at a negative apogee. Look it up. It's funny if you understand what I just said.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. Yeah. So for me, I think I'm just going to keep an eye on the redistricting fight and the gerrymandering in Texas. I was pretty conflicted early on in terms of, what are these folks are running away from this problem. But I think ultimately this put a lot of visibility on it nationally, which I think was their whole intention. I don't expect that they'll stay out of state beyond the special session. I think it's already created the conversation that they wanted, because these folks can't really afford to do that. They're part-time workers. They have to maintain their day job. They don't get paid enough, even getting their salary cut by leaving the state. Because I think this redistricting and the gerrymandering has become a real problem. And I think the more I played around with the problem, I think a lot of our polarization and a lot of the groupthink that we have in this country has originated because we've drawn the lines the way that we have to reinforce folks being able to hold on to their district, but that's drawn them to apply more to their base, right? So you think about in the primary elections, you're usually more on the extremes of your party traditionally, and then for the mainstream election, you come back to the middle. But when your district is drawn in a way that you have so many constituents that are like-minded, you don't have that value of competition. You don't have that innovation. And the politicians, frankly, don't have to be as good because they know they have a safe seat. So that's kind of what I'm watching to see what will happen here in the great state of Texas.
Yeah, we might want to come back to this one as it unfolds a little further. I think it's tied a little bit to the census. You know me, I love to bounce issues up so that we see them more clearly and we can come to a place that we all agree. The more I've thought about this, what I think about it is we're fundamentally saying, I don't care what you as an individual want. If I were a person in a district, no matter what view I had, I would see this as, oh my God, you don't care what I think. The idea of one person, one vote, of even in communities that have shared interests, they do not always have shared views of what should be done about that interest. And this fundamentally is saying, no. What we care about is whether you can support my platform. We do not actually care about what you think. So to me, every American should be looking at this and saying, wait, who's servicing whom? And can we accept a view that it actually doesn't matter? My opinion. The last thing, I guess I was going to stop there, but hey, for anyone that doesn't read Heather Cox Richardson, she's an amazing historian and writer. She produces a daily thing called Letters from American. Look at what she talked about today. What I like about Heather is she puts current events in historic context so that we don't over-rotate on this moment, but have an opportunity to see that many of the trends we're seeing are ones that have been around. What today's was about is there are people who are trying to change the view of what our founders meant when they said people or when they said freedom and rights. And she went back to the words and then talked about 10 leaders who over the course of history have fought off those who would change the meaning of who we are. I commend her to you every day, but this day, Sunday, the 10th of August, was for me a particularly inspiring view of what individuals have done over the course of our history to make sure that we remain true to who we are. And I commend that to you. It made my day.
Awesome. Thanks for pointing that out to us. Lifting everybody up. Well, lifting the good ones up.
Yeah, everybody.
Everybody. We're here for everybody.
We are, because everyone's good.
Well, that's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
So thanks for joining us this week. Remember, we're here for you. Look for a link in the show notes to provide us feedback or to suggest topics for next time. I've been told feedback is a gift, and it has proven to be so over the course of my life. So join us next week for the Understandable Insights podcast. Wherever you listen, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another.